called Kitsilano, where we have some really nice mature maple trees that shade and provide a fantastic setting. But of course, not everybody is as lucky in Vancouver, so we also have areas where the canopy cover is much lower, and I'll show you a little bit about that. So very much about Vancouver is about the setting, of course, as I said, the mountains, the sea. We have really nice beach environments as well. So it's not only about the green infrastructure in terms of parks and street trees, it's also about the blue spaces, it's about the surrounding mountain areas, it's about the beaches. So it's a very diverse green infrastructure that provides very good qualities to the city. And then there's also a lot of focus in these days, I would say, on the more social component of greening and green infrastructure. How do we deliver green spaces and green infrastructure all the way on the ground, for example, through community gardening? And this is a project here at the university campus of UBC. And this is kind of developing nicely, I would say, although I have seen European cities where maybe we've had a stronger not-for-profit and community involvement in some of the greening issues than I've seen in Vancouver so far. So there's definitely room for development here. As you already said, Barbara, that Vancouver is really eager to become the greenest city by 2020, and green, that here means, of course, many things, anything from energy conservation and being self-sufficient in terms of energy generation, but also in terms of its urban forest strategy and the wish to expand its canopy cover. Where the city currently actually has a declining canopy cover, and we have about 17.5% urban tree canopy cover right now, which has dropped over the last 2 decades from about 22%. So we want to get back to those 22%, and one way of doing that is by tree planting on especially public sites. Where we are facing with a specific challenge is that private development in Vancouver is very strong. It's an attractive city, a green city. Everybody wants to come and live here, which pushes up house prices and also the need for new housing and development. And that actually has led to a rapid decrease of private trees, which is really worrying because it actually has led to this decreasing canopy cover. So we are at UBC and also with other colleagues. For example, this is a project led by MIT, trying to assess what is not only the canopy cover of the city, but also what are the qualities of our green spaces. How can we connect those in the green infrastructure approach? And also what is the viewscape, the tree viewscape? And this project actually assessed from the street level how green, how treed Vancouver is. And as you can see here, the green view index of 26% is actually one of the highest indexes of international large cities that have been studied so far. So I think I will leave my little journey of Vancouver here, a green city which wants to be greener, but which is also faced with some of the issues that many popular cities are faced with, development and loss of canopy cover.
Thank you very much, Cecil, for that and for showing us around Vancouver a bit. And with all this information already coming from Stephan and Cecil, I would just like to remind our listeners here today to send in your questions so that we can take them just after our speakers and their input. Stephan, if you sort of look back at the pictures that Cecil now showed us, it seems that there's sort of a lot of green stuff, which makes all the difference really for a sustainable and livable city. It's become clear that it's good for health, it offers space for recreation, it makes cities more resilient to climate change, protects diversity, helps green the economy and bring people really together, people from different walks of life also. So can we conclude that this would be our main message to cities? Go green and your city will be a wonderful place for people to live?
Very nice pictures indeed, and I hope that Cecil will invite us all one day to see Vancouver. And of course, we should also be reminded, I think, that also European cities can have a high amount of green spaces. For the cities that I know, Central European cities, we have at least 40%, maybe even 50% sometimes of green areas in cities. And this green, we know from a lot of studies, can do quite a lot of good to the cities. We call it now ecosystem services, as you all know, regulating services, provisioning services, but also importantly cultural services in the cities like recreation, giving identity of place to the people living in a city, and so forth. So I think in this regard, of course, we can be quite confident that we give a good message when we say that green can solve a lot of issues in cities. whether ecological issues or social issues. But I think, and that was one of the main points really, or is one of the main points of green search, that while the green as such can do a lot of good, we really need systematic approaches to enhancing the services that this green can provide. So we should not only say, yes, every piece of green in the city is a green infrastructure, but we should really say, yes, every piece of green in the city can be part of the green infrastructure if we plan it properly and design it well and manage it well. And that is what we tried really also in the Green Search project. We worked quite hard on not only providing the definition that you showed in the beginning, but also we said, well, green space should be planned in a way that it fulfills or follows certain principles. And we identified 4 core principles in this respect. We said it should be multifunctional, and that is a key issue, I think, as we all know, given the pressures on spaces in cities. So we should try to not only provide green spaces that fulfills one function, but can also provide several functions, whether it's ecological or social functions or aesthetic functions. And it should be connected, because there's a lot of evidence that connected green spaces are providing more of the services that we expect from them. And an important topic that we should also adopt in green infrastructure planning is to try to integrate and align our approach between green planning the green infrastructure with the gray infrastructures. I think that holds particular potential. The well-known example is, of course, stormwater management, where we say that maybe the sewage system will not cope any longer with current rainstorm runoff, but in particular so with future rainstorm runoff under climate change conditions. And green space here might really bring a lot of benefits, relieve the pressure from the sewage system, but if we do it well, this additional water in the landscape can also add quality to this landscape by providing water for trees, for instance, or providing habitats to species. And a very important way of promoting the green resource in cities is doing the planning in a cooperative way or socially inclusive way. So enhancing stakeholder inclusion in planning, because and in developing the green infrastructure, and not only following traditional top-down lines. So I think in this way, yes, green can do quite a lot good, but we should also acknowledge that green cannot solve all the problems in cities, but that it's part of a wider game. Just one example, air pollution. Quite clearly, green can capture air pollutants, but of course this cannot solve the entire problem, but we also need to link this to reduction of air pollution emissions from cars or industry and so forth. So we should not just sell that green is doing these good things, but we should also be realistic in what it can do. That's what I want to say at this point. Otherwise, I think there would be a risk, really, that we also compromise our own issue, our own initiative for strengthening green space planning. So we should also always be realistic and always see what we can do and where we need other partners to solve the issues that are at stake. We should also be aware, of course, of some disservices. All participants, I guess, are quite familiar with this concept. Maybe it's pollen that creates hay fever or strengthens hay fever. So things like this should be taken into account. And finally, I think also we should be aware of that creating green space can have also unwanted effects that we now call eco-gentrification. So maybe it increases the property prices in a certain area, and then the property does not become affordable anymore for the more socially weak people living in cities. So we should be also careful in which approach we take to not create unjust cities, but rather strengthen environmental justice in cities. That's what I would like to mention to respond to your question.
Quite interesting. So definitely green infrastructure is more than just a green space in the city. There's lots of dimensions to it and not everything. Cecil, to Stephan, what's your...
Yeah, so I think a lot of the things that Stephan says, that I'm fully agreeing with, obviously. I think first on a personal note, and I guess I'm biased because I like green, of course, but whenever I travel to cities across the world, often the nicest places you experience are green spaces. Either is it in a nice shopping street like La Rambla in Barcelona, or you're in a nice park, or you're in a woodland area like here in Stanley Park. It gives you a special feeling, especially when these green spaces are used intensively. So I think many cities benefit from having a good green infrastructure, there's no doubt about it. Of course, there's also cities that maybe are not so green and are still have a high quality of life, places like Venice in Italy, that have other qualities and have other ways of offering qualities. But I think in general one can say that cities need green space and need trees, they need a variety of green spaces, they need a network, an integrated network. My only concern can be sometimes that green infrastructure is an abstract term for many people living in cities. So, and I think that also connects a little bit to the issue Stephan brought up about environmental justice and making sure that everybody benefits. We also have to be careful that we don't talk too technical about these issues and really bring home green infrastructure to the people where they locally live and work and recreate. So we have to make sure we keep those connections and make those connections between people and their trees. And make sure that we deliver green infrastructure by having bottom-up, inclusive approaches to green space planning, design, and management. And I think there's some really nice examples also in the Green Search project of how we use concepts like biocultural diversity for really digging down into what makes people and trees, people and nature connect in cities, and how can we use those connections that are very individual often, but can also be very social. How do we use those connections to bring those benefits to a city or even a metropolitan level? And I fully agree with Stephan that green infrastructure will not be our one solution to everything, but I think it will be an important solution, co-solution at least in developing sustainable and vibrant cities for the future. Just alone the idea that we need, of course, a good green infrastructure to adapt cities and mitigate climate change impacts will be crucial. I mean, there's not many cities in the world that will not benefit from having a higher tree canopy cover, for example, for the simple fact it will mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. But we have to be clever about it, as Stephan also said. We have to integrate really green infrastructure in other sectors in the city. We have to think about things like public health. We have to think about education, urban development, city branding, economic development, and make sure that green space is a natural part of all these city strategies and plans, rather than its own standalone strategy, which is of course often happening still in cities. That green infrastructure is doing its own thing, and maybe not so well connected, and then in that sense also doesn't have the impact it could have. So I think we have to be aware of those issues while moving forward, but I fully agree that we are at a time, a golden moment, I would say, for us working with green infrastructure, that there are these fantastic opportunities to talk with people we haven't talked with in a long time, and to make the development of green space into a primary issue for cities like Vancouver, but also cities like Ouagadougou in Africa, or cities like Fuzhou in China, where more and more people start realizing that we need green spaces as an integral part of urban development and urban quality of life.
Okay, that's excellent. We hope that many cities across the world will be this city in the world. Back to the final moment of reflection. You have been observing it after you have moved out in your direct responsibility as a coordinator. Looking at it now, are you happy with the course that the project has taken? Have you made any further going?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. Yeah, exactly. So now I've been extremely pleased with how Green Search has progressed, and of course we knew with Stephan having been very much integrated into the leadership of the project from the start, things have developed, continue to develop very nicely. And I'm especially impressed by two things in green search. I think the first is the visibility of the project has been very good. So not only in scientific circles with a fantastic output in terms of scientific articles. It seems every week there's an article coming out these days but has a green search stamp on it, but also in policy circles. So whenever I meet people in both in Europe, when I'm at conferences and I meet people from the European Commission, but also when I'm in Asia or in North America, many people are aware of green search, have heard about it, and have also realized that it has made an impact. And the second part I'm really happy about is that in spite of the high scientific content of the project, it has maintained a very strong applied character, and not in the least by products like the manual, the handbook that Stephan presented earlier, and also the interactions with cities over time. And I know at the final conference, and we'll get back to that later, there will be a very good discussion also with some of the cities about how we can implement some of the ideas of green search. Finally, I think the idea of biocultural diversity, which was not a new idea, but was really brought to the cities by green search, is very innovative. So a way of connecting people diversity and green diversity, nature diversity, I think is extremely innovative and is a necessary way of making those connections between people and nature, exactly dealing with some of the challenges I outlined before. And I think green search has been very good in promoting that concept, doing some really good empirical research on it, and also lining it up as a very good complement to the planning approach of green infrastructure planning. So overall, yes, I'm extremely pleased, and I'm also very much looking forward to new publications that are still coming, as well as to our final conference.
Okay, great, and over to you, Alice.
Yes, thank you very much. And I've been just sort of screening the questions that are coming in. And let's try and answer as many as possible, I would say. The first one comes from Birgit Georgi, who is an independent consultant on climate resilience and adaptation. And she asks how to deal with the request for denser cities on one side and greener cities on the other side. And I would say probably both of you, Cecil and Stephan, can provide insights from these different geographical and urban contexts you're living and working in. Stephan, should I start with you?
Okay. Yes, I will try. I mean, this, hello, Birgit. This is, of course, a very important question, as all our bigger cities in Europe are facing this challenge. They get influx of people, so the population is growing, in particular, of course, when they are economically growing. They need more space, therefore, for housing. And this puts a lot of pressure on open spaces, and in particular, the green spaces. And how to solve this? At the same time, we want to have more green spaces to adapt cities to climate change, to provide open spaces for recreation, and so forth. I think that's exactly one of the reasons why we need to work so hard for such an approach, a kind of systematic approach, whereby we try to create connected and multifunctional green spaces in cities, which provide a lot of benefits on a fairly limited amount of space. We need also to try to tap into all the green space resources that we have in cities, whether it's public parks, or it's also private green spaces, which are by far the bigger resource of green spaces. So they need to be included. We may need to look into additional green spaces, such as green roofs and green facades. Still, I think, when we do that, we need also to be quite clear about that there will be limits to what we can do in enhancing the multifunctionality of green spaces. So when we come to very densely built cities, we may simply need to acknowledge at some point that it's not possible to plant the trees that we need to have there if they further densify and maybe are also have a lot of things going on underground, whether it's utilities or whether it's underground car parks. And so we need also to be quite clear about that we may need to discuss and to develop hard boundaries for green spaces to protect them. This may be green space standards that we need to develop, which need to be locally adapted, of course. this may be other means by which we effectively also preserve our green spaces in cities.
Thank you very much, Stephan, for your point of view here. Cecil, are you of the same opinion, or have you experienced also different ways of approaching this challenge in Canada?
No, unfortunately, I cannot really say that I disagree with Stephan. No, I think it's a lot of good issues there. I think one, Vancouver is obviously facing this densification issue, and it's also an issue of environmental justice. It's about who can afford, even in denser cities, to buy houses, to find rental housing. And I think in that sense we have to be much more clever in how we design our cities, because densification as such can be very positive, as we know. It can create walkable cities that's a phenomenon that here in North America is very rare, of course. Very few of our cities here are walkable, and Vancouver is one of the places that actually is becoming more walkable and more bikeable. But at the expense then of some of our green spaces. So we have to be clever in how we design green spaces. We have to be clever in, as Stephan said, ensuring quality and functionality of green spaces, but also being more tough and strict on how we protect our green spaces like urban trees. And when trees have to disappear because of densification, we have to make sure they are replaced by other trees or other green spaces that have very similar functionality. So we have to be tougher in our bylaws, in our planning, in our legislation, and also more clever in how we design cities that are both dense but also green. And I think that will be the challenge for the next 50 to 100 years, will be really to develop cities that are both green and dense, that are both livable, walkable, but also still have that excellent access to our nature and green spaces.
Thank you, Cecil, on that.
Alice, if I just may make one additional comment. I
Sure.
think also to be perceptive now. So we need to develop good visionary strategies now, where we clearly can provide evidence and show how we want to develop the green resource, for instance, in densely inner cities. We just had a project where we explored the relation to climate change adaptation of green spaces. And we could show how many trees we need in certain environments. And I think to develop this kind of knowledge base and show it to decision makers is now quite important, because cities are dynamic. And there will be also opportunities. For instance, now mobility patterns change a lot. And now we need to develop the concepts already where we can show for what the open spaces are needed, instead of simply using them for parking cars.
So we really need to be very visionary about our work already now to be able to deal with or live in our cities in 20, 50, 100 years. Actually, Cecil, you mentioned gentrification just now, and Stephan, you mentioned it before and as well, and we've got another question on that topic from Tom Hawkswell from the Fraunhofer IAO in Germany. And he's wondering, Stephan, whether in your research you've come across any mechanisms or approaches that might help avoid gentrification while still enhancing urban green infrastructure. And are there examples whether some cities are better at dealing with this challenge than others?
That's a difficult question for me, because we did not really research that in depth in our project. We discussed the topic, but we did not really provide evidence by studies on how green space affects gentrification issues, or is related to gentrification issues. But I think if I can start with trying to give an answer, and then hopefully Cecil can join in, it should be always a kind of concern that we have in our mind when thinking of green spaces. So we should take into account the social conditions in different parts of the city. We should think, when we make our plans, how that might affect the land prices or similar indicators that we have to gentrification. We should, as Cecil said, really work also with the people to take their concerns on board when we do the planning.
Thank you, Stephan. Cecil, any views from you on this? question.
Yeah, no, I think there's some research now coming that looks at this social justice and environmental equity issues and so, and also, I mean, I know cities like New York have really been riding that or developing that agenda very much, trying to implement greening and development of parks in the areas of the city that are maybe not so well off right now, trying to spread the green development rather than having it always in the areas that are already well off in terms of green space and often income. So I think there are definitely approaches that can be done. There are examples to be seen, and of course it doesn't mean that we should not green our cities because there's a risk of gentrification. We should just be aware of it and try to spread the benefits and distribute the benefits of green space as good as we can.
Thank you, Cecil. Unfortunately, there's still a few open questions here, but we are coming to the end of our time for this first Green Search webinar. But nevertheless, I would like to ask you, actually, there's another opportunity in which you can pose our questions, because we have a LinkedIn group which is called Green Infrastructure Practitioners Network. And here there are a lot of Green Search partners actually, but also other urban green infrastructures experts in it. And we're happy to continue taking your questions there, but also, yeah, continuing the dialogue amongst researchers, city planners and experts who actually have to underground implement urban green infrastructure. That being said, I think you already also in your answers to the question summarized quite well whether green can solve it all, and Stephan said it can't, but it can solve a lot if we do it properly. So we need better visionary and integrated planning, and then of course implementation. We need to be realistic and also not potentially naive about maybe negative impacts of urban green, but then don't hesitate to then not implement urban green, but just keep it in mind. And here the key word was eco-gentrification. I think that sums it up quite well. And Stephan and Cecil, I would like to thank you very much for sharing your extensive experience and research work both within Green Search but also beyond Green Search with our audience today. And I think before we say a final goodbye on behalf of the Green Search project, we of course would like to thank you for joining us today, and we wish you a lovely summer evening, very hot in Europe at least, or a lovely summer day in Canada, or from wherever you have joined us today. And we hope to, of course, hear you for the next webinar on the 20th of July, which will feature cities. So today we had the researchers speaking. Next time we will have cities sharing their experience. And of course, remember to come to the Green Search Final Conference from the 20th to the 21st of September in Malmö in Sweden, where you can ask all researchers lots of questions because everyone will be there. And for more information on the conference, the webinar, but of course also Green Search and all the products that are coming out over the next few months until September, please go and visit www.greensearch.eu for more information. And with that, thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully hear you again in July. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye to everyone as well from my side.